Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. Today, we have a topic that we have been preparing for weeks, months, well, probably years if you account for all the Windows on ARM experiments, the Snapdragon 8CX or whatever processors, all that jazz about potential competition for M series chips, be it much more efficient AMD APUs, being now Intel's Lunar Lake coming up with 3 nanometer designs. But one chip has ruled them all when it comes to media discussion. It is the Snapdragon X Elite. It's Qualcomm's first chip with their custom Orion cores. It's a 4 nanometer design. It has 12 performance, no efficiency cores. It has a pretty middling to low-end GPU, even by APU standards. It has 40 plus tops in terms of compute. It has its fans like Inamul joining the chat and sharing that he loves Snapdragon X Elite so much he wants to turn it into a rocket and then probably ride that rocket, which is absolutely fine. We don't kink shame here. Welcome, brother. Mokotic asking if Inamul is a bot. I don't know. Nobody knows. Inamul exists in a plane of existence of his own. It's a plane completely ruled by the Snapdragon X Elite. It's a plane that exists on Twitter. Inamul, you're saying no man, no bot. Do you now mean that you are no man? Is that what you're trying to say, brother? Is that like a Lord of the Rings thing? Where you're like, I am no man, but I'm also no bot, right? And then you kill the Nazgul. And it's fine, you can love the Snapdragon X Elite. The Snapdragon X Elite has existed in our minds since like last October. It is basically like a baby. We were like diagnosed with a pregnancy for the Snapdragon X Elite, and it's finally come out of our whatever. And I'm absolutely fine with having people who love it, who hate it. Some of you, I hope, are willing to have a nuanced discussion because that's what I am here for. Now, I do want to start with something Apple specific, which is we already have obviously the M3 Mac lineup. Well, unless we are supposed to get like an M3 Ultra or something like that, but that's likely not going to happen. So we do have the M3, the M3 Pro, the M3 Max chips. Well, and we have now been, of course, been blessed by the ultra thin and light iPad Pro with the M4. So people have been asking, well, when are we getting a MacBook with that same processor? And according to Ross Young, who is primarily a display leaker, but obviously display supply is connected to all other supply. So he is saying we should expect 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro models by the end of this year. Now, whether that's very late Q3 or sometime Q4, sometimes hard to tell, but from everything we know this does line up with what Mark Gurman has said, which would unfortunately line up with Mark Gurman's prediction about us not getting new Mac Studios and Mac Pros with like M4 Max and Ultra chips until the very end of like next year, or at least the second half, which is a bummer, obviously, because that would put it at least a year away from now. That will give the competition quite a lot of time to catch up, to launch processors on 3 nanometer, Intel 20A, stuff like that. So let's see if that part of their predictions is correct, but at least this part I definitely believe a lot. M4 Max by the end of the year. Apple probably wants to sell out of inventory of M4 devices, M3 devices, and even like to a degree M2. Then they will have to like consider what price changes they have to make now with more competition on the horizon. Do they have to offer more base RAM, base storage, things like that? And I think for now they will probably want to sell out of M3 with all the back to school programs, and then slowly we will transition to M4, especially since M4 right now is also pretty supply constrained. It's an N3E chip, the very first out there. So for now it's just for iPad Pro, but we will be seeing it on the 14-inch MacBook Pro, which also makes it very likely that we are gonna see M4 Pro, M4 Max chips around that time too. Maybe later, but definitely like expected in the first half of 2025. Kotek, you're saying you see Inamul all over Twitter. Yes, that you do. Believe me, I know. Spamming everywhere that he loves Snapdragon. Well, and now he's joined us, right? So this was a little bit of preparation. Like I was gonna introduce you to the topic with some Apple related stuff, so you know, like competition isn't that, even if the Snapdragon X Elite wins, spoiler, it doesn't. Against M3, Apple still has something to come back, but we do have to wait at least a little bit. As always, I do want to encourage you guys, if you are watching, please leave a like. It helps out tremendously with the algorithm. Please comment. You see, I love interacting with the live chat. I hope you enjoyed that too. Please subscribe. That obviously helps out tremendously to grow our community. Share the video to family and friends who you think might enjoy it. And of course, if you catch me live and feel like supporting me directly, leave a super chat or a super sticker. All direct support is getting reinvested right back into the channel. And if you want to support this channel in the long term, you can subscribe to my Patreon. Link is also in the description. But for now, let's get really started on the Snapdragon X Elite. Now, I have prepared a couple of videos that I would like to react to, and over time, this will be a long ongoing like topic on this channel. I do also want to, of course, to react to like in-depth benchmarks and things like that. But the first 2 days, which is where we are now, have been an absolute mess, right? We didn't know which SKUs were tested. We didn't know if there are like firmware issues, BIOS issues. We didn't know always which apps were running on the CPU or GPU. Like some people were testing like Handbrake, and then they were like showing like the Intel CPU result, but the Snapdragon X Elite GPU result, which makes absolutely no sense given what this test runs. And somehow we also didn't get a proper test comparing the actual like media encoders on the chips. We have now seen that the GPUs are not just impacted by compatibility and software translation and emulation problems, but also the fact that there's like questions about like basically like security authentication, because obviously if you're playing like multiplayer games, there's like anti-cheat software involved, and it might not do too well with ARM processors. Beyond that, there's also the question that the GPU inside the X Elite seems to be pretty crappy in general, which is a little bit of a bummer given that they are quite competitive with Apple, depending on which generations you compare, like between the Snapdragon chips and the A series chips. They definitely are not so between now the Snapdragon X Elite and the M series processors, often even losing against like the M2 and definitely the M3. But yeah, so there's a lot that we still have to go through, and I have collected some of the best and or most interesting videos. I will not be going through all of them in full, and definitely not everything today, but over time I think we'll be able to create a pretty cohesive and complete picture of what this Snapdragon X Elite launch looks like and how it develops over time. Evan Rogers Long, a friend of the show, saying, sure seems like the X Elite chip isn't anything special and Qualcomm really oversold them. Well, if it had launched like in February maybe, or even like January, right? I think the fact that it would have been like half a year before like before the Strix Point launches, and like 9 months before the launch of Intel Lunar Lake, and even before their presentations, right? That would be a completely different story. But now it's in June, it's the end of June almost. By mid-July, we'll be getting Strix Point laptops. Intel just said that expect Lunar Lake devices in Q3. So yeah, it's definitely not looking too good. Jamie Ibrahim, also long friend of the show, saying, I've heard that Adreno X1 is just a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 GPU running at double the clock speed. Elite, they haven't given us too many architectural details on the GPU. From what I believe, it's definitely like an Adreno GPU from like the way we know it. So it's not like a brand new GPU design the way the Orion cores are new. But whether it's more comparable to the Gen 2 or Gen 3, I read through like an NTX chip analysis, I couldn't tell you. Evan Rogers, Lamau, isn't it exactly what Intel did with 10th and 11th gen? What exactly? Like announce it way too early and then have it compete with completely other processors? There's a problem only. So far, there are no video card testing programs, and all of them go through Prism virtualization and may show results lower than expected. There are some tests that do run like on the X Elite, like without translation layers. However, there's also a point, which is if you look, for example, at Rosetta in the beginning when the M chips came out, you will find that GPU was often far less constrained unless we hit like high frame rates and then we hit CPU benchmarks than CPU tests, right? GPU translation, if the API is correct, or like it's fitting basically, which for example Snapdragon chips do support like the latest DirectX APIs. They do support Vulkan, which some stuff that will run horribly on them, for example, would be like DirectX 9 games, older games, because they don't have like direct support for them. They will basically like emulate an emulated app, which is, I think that will be horrible. And given that one of Windows's biggest advantages is its backwards compatibility, that's kind of a shame. But yeah, we'll get to that. And as I said, we are covering the launch right now. Obviously, we will be covering, it's like, you know how like AMD GPUs at least used to have like the meme of like fine wine, right? That they age really well because the driver support gets better and developers learn to optimize it rather than just going for NVIDIA. And AMD GPUs are in consoles, which also helps like with developer expertise. That is unfortunately, like, I don't think that will happen with the Snapdragon X Elite, but I will give it a chance. I'll keep covering it. I think if Qualcomm will not give up, then I think there will not be a bad competitor to Apple M-series chips and AMD. I think so too. As we transition to like second generation Orion cores, as we transition to 3 nanometer, as we hopefully get a much bigger GPU, maybe we'll get like a larger chip in general, something to compete more with like M Pro and M Max rather than base M. I think they can compete. The question is, will it make sense? Will like OEMs, like laptop makers, actually keep ordering those chips? And that will depend on if people buy them. We've seen it time and time again that people don't really. Like the 8CX Gen 3, even their last chip, which was pretty much like basically an 8 Gen 2, like that one was a disaster. Like it was so poorly optimized, both in hardware and software, like by which I mean like firmware and then apps, right? It was just like nobody wanted devices with it. And while the Snapdragon X Elite is definitely a lot better, it also will have to face dramatically stronger competition as Intel finally gets like going with their own fabs, as AMD like creates larger APUs to also compete with like M Pro and M Max rather than just base M. So yeah, like it's not all in favor just of like, oh, ARM is more efficient. And in fact, we have now seen several tests where like, look, if you're using it like a regular device, and especially if you have a lot of apps installed and some of those apps might be non-native, your battery life might be pretty the same, in some cases worse. So it's really hard to tell. And it will be better, yes, if you're using only optimized apps and you really maybe set the system on like balanced mode, which we'll talk about in this video too. But that is also not really competitive with Apple because it doesn't quite achieve the same results as Apple, for example, by giving you full performance, whether you're plugged in or not, right? Even like instant boot, it gets close, not quite the same as what Apple achieves. waves. So yeah, it's a difficult topic to cover because there's so many nuances here. Evan Rogers, now Intel 10th or 11th gen was the exact same as the prior gen, but with roughly double the wattage. Ah, yes, well, it depends a little bit whether we're talking desktop or mobile. That was what confused me. But yeah, Intel has had oh, it's the same architecture. It's basically the same chip in many ways, or in most ways. And we basically used like slight node improvements to clock it 5% higher, but at the expense of 15-20% higher power consumption. And that obviously added up. And whenever they also made like a big core jump, like going from 6 to 8 cores, going from like the 8th gen to the 9th gen on the same 14 nanometer node, it just like catapulted power consumption up by double. So by the way, guys, I just wanted to give you a big thank you. This is exactly how I love my live chat to be: very lively, very engaged. But I do have to start this video now. I'll keep on looking at your chats. If you really, really want me to read out your chat, please make it a super chat, because then I definitely will see it. Then I definitely won't miss it. And then I'll give it a lot more in-depth coverage.
I've been waiting for this moment for 4 years. Yes, this is just 2 of the Snapdragon X Elite laptops that
I sped it up a little because I don't want to jump too much in the video, so I would rather it just flow naturally by, but a little faster. Let me know if maybe it feels too fast. It's 1.25. Because Max and Vadim, well, especially Vadim, do talk a little fast anyway.
Ordered, and in this video, I'm gonna address all of the inconsistent benchmarks that we've seen online by hitting this head first. Yes, I have the lowest base SKU of the X Elite right here, which I believe is the 78, and this is the 84, which is the most powerful version of the X Elite, which only comes in this Galaxy Book 4 Edge, while I have the 13.8-inch Microsoft Surface laptop right here. So in this video, we're gonna be doing a ton of performance testing with both of these laptops, so that way you know exactly which Snapdragon X Elite SKU is right for you. Let's get this thing out of the box. This is the Dune version, and the wrapping.
Okay. I apologize, guys. My notes app is pretty broken right now because I was stupid enough to install macOS Sequoia. I won't be torturing myself with that. I'll just make the screen a little bit larger. And yes, so we'll just have a talk. I'll try to remember everything that happens. We'll have like discussions also about like in-depth benchmarks. So we'll have a lot of written data anyway to react to.
Whatever. Oh, hey, yeah.
Is it a big deal that Qualcomm wasn't able to achieve Armv9 with basically 3 years of runway? Well, that depends, right? Because the issue with that is that the Snapdragon X Elite is launching now with a chip that definitely is like very much... it's an older chip, right? That's the problem, which means that it... how do I say it nicely, right? It's sometimes like we also have like devices like Vision Pro from Apple, right? Because and they run M2 even though like M3 is available, and the reason that happens is because it's a product that needed a lot of validation. It's a new device. It needed a chip that basically they knew would run, right? That they had finished firmware for drivers, things like that. So Qualcomm basically worked with Orion cores, probably optimized them for years in the background in the lab, and then the issue was the second it actually came to shipping them, well, Armv9 is now out, but also Armv9 by itself is not a huge performance improver, right? What matters more is like the amount of cache, the node you use, things like that. So it by itself not being Armv9 is not terrible, but it's also not great, given that, of course, we've already had Armv9 processors from Qualcomm.
This feels, yeah, kind of like it did before, but it feels nice. I mean, this Dune color, pretty sweet. Ooh, I like how they did the dark the dark sand or beige right here. It looks pretty clean. Wow, and I'm actually surprised that there are no stickers. Yes, no Intel sticker. Finally.
But
Honestly, guys, I
other
love
devices. Oh my
the
god,
design
why
of
does
this
YouTube's UI work that way? Like I click it twice and Jesus. But it's also the mouse just clicks so fast. You do have other devices that have like X Elite stickers. So the fact that it's sticker free, it's basically a Microsoft thing. It's not a Qualcomm thing. Multi-core scored and they're only I don't believe like pre-leaked like results for like Snapdragon 8 Gen 4. Like people were talking about like Exynos 2500 leaks, right? Like a month or two ago online, and now a lot of rumors point that towards us maybe not even getting the Exynos 2500 because the Samsung's 3nm node is so bad. And yeah, there's like just a lot of stuff that is like will be missing from the Orion, from not just the Orion cores, but also the X Elite in general. Like it might actually be that its GPU is a gen or two old, right? It might be that its media engines are actually older than even on their regular Snapdragon chips, but that's sometimes forgivable, but not given the state of how competitive the actual industry is right now. It would have been, for example, forgivable for Apple with M1 because it was competing with like MacBooks with Intel chips that by that point weren't even the latest Intel chips. So, but Apple at that point with M1 gave you everything the A14 chip had, right? It was built on the 5nm, it was built on the same architecture and more, of course, like more bandwidth. It had like some Mac specific IP as well there to make Rosetta better. So yeah, it's not a problem by and of itself, but it's not as forgivable as it would have been like 3 years ago. Evan Rogers, you're not seeing any evidence that Nuvia is making those chips any better. Yeah, this is a long time illusion, I feel like, by people thinking that, oh, those people came from Apple, right? Or those people did that once. So if we buy up all their intellectual property and then combine them with our resources, that is a guarantee for success. Like, look at the Humane guys, right? Like with the AI pins and things like that. Do those guys make you feel like they're like Apple, right? With the crappy device they launched? No. People matter, of course, intellectual property matters, but the actual like environment that the company creates can often transcend the abilities of like a single human, even if they're the greatest engineer in the world. If you put them in an environment where maybe his expertise or her expertise, I apologize, or their expertise for that matter, is not as put to work as it should be, well, now you don't get anything out of it. And the same, like it is kind of like the discussion that Apple always brings up, which is like 1,000 no's for every yes, and Apple doesn't always get it right either. But like the Humane AI pin guys, right? You know that product would never come out from Apple, especially not in the form that it ended up coming out. So in my opinion, it goes far beyond like, oh, we bought Nuvia, and Apple lost a few engineers, that means Apple is doomed. Well, I think M3, M4 have quite honestly disproven that.
Laptop, probably because it's kind of like a MacBook clone, to be honest. Now, while this thing's setting up, let's unbox.
But the problem is, Tipo Master, and thank you for joining the chat as well. You're saying Orion cores seem decent. The question is not if they're decent or not. Everything is decent at this point. Even Meteor Lake, which I have like shit on this channel, is decent, like objectively, when you take the individual cores, the Intel 4 node, the way it's like a very complicated tile design where it combines like very different individual dice into one processor. AMD does like their APUs and stuff like that. The problem is that decent is not good enough at this point. If you have competition as strong as Apple, AMD, even if Intel, by the way, is behind this chip right now, not only do they have a generation coming out, but they also are Intel, right? They are the company that people know and trust in the Windows space. You cannot just compete with that with decent. When Apple came along and put their own Apple Silicon in MacBooks, they knew they would have a hard time explaining to people that they are better than Intel if what they were offering was decent. So they created something that was far beyond decent. And yeah, and of course, Apple's brand is a million times stronger than Qualcomm's.
The Galaxy Book 4 Edge. You got the Samsung. You got 3 stickers, baby. You better know that's an Energy Star.
And yeah, Evan Rogers, you're pointing out like how battery behaves during gaming. People have over the years, I feel like, very, very underestimated the insane efficiency advantage that Apple has with their GPUs. Like I remember playing like a game like Infinity Blade 1 and 2 on like even like my original iPad, my iPad 2, and I was playing those games for like 6-7 hours on those iPads. Now, of course, those games are old at that point, and yeah, they are like hyperlinear and whatever, but no Android tablet was even close to that. And when you actually try to compare architecturally, like the efficiency of Apple's GPU cores versus NVIDIA, AMD, Intel's integrated GPUs, Apple was far ahead even back in those days. It's just that their GPUs were small, crappy, they didn't have the bandwidth, the RAM to work with, right? But the efficiency was always there, and I think people underestimate it. I just played Assassin's Creed Mirage on my M1 iPad, and like after playing for like 2 hours, I lost 40% battery, and that is like a AAA game.
Right there. Got the X Elite for the battery life. And take a look at this design language, guys. Samsung is pulling an Apple MacBook Air with...
Tipo Master, I actually think Lunar Lake will be more efficient than this. Lunar Lake is a smaller chip in general. It consists out of 4 performance and 4 efficiency cores. Lunar Lake does not yet have any bigger variants. The new efficiency cores are completely redesigned. They have a ton of cache and stuff like that. So they will actually probably be the industry's first efficiency cores that comprehensively compete with Apple's efficiency cores. And its GPU will likely be like 2 times faster than what's in here.
These edges that go in, but the ports actually have this nice little bump out.
Yeah, so the Galaxy books are kind of notorious for like looking nice on the outside, not doing too much on the inside, like actually underperforming in terms of cooling. The firmware in Samsung devices outside of their smartphones is really hit and miss. We often can have like weird battery life issues. They just aren't quite on the same OEM level as like even a company like ASUS, which just launched like the Vivo book. And obviously ASUS has a ton of problem too. But like Lenovo, obviously like your HPs, your Dells, I would put all of them above Samsung. What Samsung has the advantage of is obviously like, well, if you get like a Samsung Galaxy book, you kind of can expect it to have a nice OLED screen. It probably is decently priced and stuff like that. But yeah, overall, I have never seen Samsung do anything too special with their laptops, which is a bit of a shame because I do think they would have the expertise for it. But given that laptops are mostly a lower margin market than something like smartphones, well, Samsung expertise is rather being paid for better smartphones than better laptops.
That looks pretty nice, honestly. I like it. So we got these bad boys set up. I've set them both to performance.
Yes, Evan Rogers. Lunar Lake does get the N3 advantage, N3B advantage. I apologize, and thank you for correcting us, Tipo Master. But I think it goes beyond that. This is like a very, very new architecture from Intel. I think it would honestly win even on 4 nanometer. But again, it doesn't have to. It is 3 nanometer.
mode. We have them plugged in right now because we want to see the performance while plugged in and unplugged. By
so
the way,
this is the first
the
thing
X
I do
Elite
wanted
80
to discuss
SKU,
here,
so it's not quite
which
as
is,
fast as
can
the
it match
84 SKU,
Apple's
which is
promise of
exclusively
giving
in
you the
this
same
Samsung.
performance
This one
whether
actually clocks
unplugged
higher
or
boost clock up to full
plugged in? The only Apple Silicon device that doesn't quite get that is like the M3 MacBook Pro. Especially when it comes to GPU, it seems to like more power, but not really that much power because in terms of the device itself cannot supply it. I think it's just more confident in of itself for battery considerations and things like that. So so nobody yet has come close to to the experience of Apple Silicon Macs.
3.2 instead of 4.0. The base clock is 3.8 instead of
so we do have different SKUs here. It's sometimes difficult to tell because Microsoft obfuscates those details often on their website. But we do have now the Surface laptop here, and we do have the Galaxy Book. The Galaxy Book obviously also being 16 inches here. So let's see how those compare.
3.4, and the GPU is faster as well, 4.6 T-flops compared to 3.8. Let's go ahead and
that is also a big part of the discrepancy. We haven't actually heard if that's just a clock difference or if there are more cores inside. Let me briefly bring up an AnTag here. Right, because AnTag did have a breakdown of the X Elite, and they did point out all the the three variants of the X Elite, and then there's one X Plus variant. So we do have the 80 version, which does clock somewhat high, but then the 78 version, that one is absolute garbage. I have no idea why it exists. And then we also do have the GPU discrepancy for the highest end version, which is quite a miss in my opinion, given just how underperforming this GPU is. I don't know why they really did it this way, unless they really wanted to use every single chip they produce, because 4 nanometer is very good yields. It's very unlikely that they have to throw out more than 5-10% of the dies, and they probably wanted to save just as many as possible to maximize their return on investment here. Apple is close to achieving single core performance in the iPhone that exceeds total multi-core performance in 4-year-old iPhones. That is correct. We're 3,600 points. That's the M4 result, maybe even higher. So let's say the iPhone will come into around 3,400. That would put us definitely in the competition with 4-year-old iPhones. Yes. And let us return to YouTube.
And run Geekbench 6's CPU benchmark. By the way, both of these have 16
I apologize
gigs of
for
RAM.
sweating,
The
by the
Surface
way.
has
It's
a
an
512 gig
extremely
SSD for
humid day.
$1,350, which is honestly a pretty good price, compared to $1,750 for the Samsung, which comes with a 1 terabyte SSD. And already I'm seeing something interesting.
So yeah, the pricing is, the problem is that the Surface laptop is terribly priced. Then there's the VivoBook, which is fantastically priced, given it comes with 1 terabyte of storage and an OLED screen at $1,300, but it has noticeable other shortcomings. Its speakers aren't great, its build quality isn't on the level of a MacBook, even close. And then obviously we have the Galaxy Book, which is sort of more premium. Oh, and the VivoBook does have a very low-end X Elite version inside of it, and then the Galaxy Book is expensive, but it is big, so it does have some justifications for its price. So pricing is really a little bit all over the place. It's definitely not quite MacBook expensive, but it's getting up there, especially with the Surface laptop, and I think that is in no way justified. The GPU in X Elite is a bit more powerful than the M1 if you check in Geekbench. Yeah, but I don't like Geekbench test when it comes to when it comes to GPUs, because in compute, I probably agree that the Geekbench GPU test is quite good, but when it comes to like pixel fill rate and things like that, which are the things that matter more for gaming, like that is not very well represented in that benchmark. So I'm actually one of those guys. I'm very, very particular about what benchmarks I like or push, especially now that we have a little bit of a community that I feel somewhat responsible for. Like, to me, Geekbench's CPU test is fantastic. I've never seen any actually like good faith, high quality criticism towards it. Cinebench, I've said it's a good test for like between x86 devices. It has recently gotten better to test out ARM as well, but it's still not anywhere close. And then when it comes to GPUs, I've always said I do dislike like most 3D Mark and like GFX bench tests, but when Steel Nomad launched, it was a modern test. It was optimized for like newer rendering technologies, the latest versions of Metal and Vulkan. And then I said, yes, that benchmark is at least somewhat usable in comparison to the previously ancient ones that feel like they were optimized for like the first version of Metal ever.
Interesting. On both of these, I'm seeing the cores, and the first four cores are actually
Mokotic, you're saying it might be expensive, but you would like to buy a Surface laptop. Nobody prevents you from it, but my question is, would you really want a Windows device right now with those compatibility and emulation issues if in like the not too distant future you will have options that are based on Strix Point, on Lunar Lake, on the mobile versions of Arrow Lake? Like, do you need something right now is my question. Because I honestly, like, I've looked up some of the stuff here. It's not very impressive, unfortunately. Minecraft, yes. It's not quite the same version. Like, Minecraft is this weird thing where like every version of the game is a little different between platforms. The best game right now to test is World of Warcraft, because that one actually has had a good ARM version for a while. I believe it now also has that ARM version on Windows, and it's like it has decent effects. It's definitely not super demanding, and you can also put it into higher frame rates that would also then start to potentially challenge the CPU. So you could actually test where maybe the bottlenecks lie for your specific chip. So probably, if you ask me what game I would recommend right now to test out, it would probably be World of Warcraft.
To just below 3.0 gigahertz, while in the Surface, the rest of them are at 3.4.
Yeah, the clock speed differences, that is part of binning, that is part of targeting certain like power consumption metrics, and Qualcomm does have to get creative here because they obviously have a chip that only has 12 performance cores. So if they want to get at least like some efficiency cores, they just have to downclock their performance cores and hope that they sit much more comfortably on the performance per watt curve, and therefore be more efficient, right?
And on the Samsung, they're at 3.8. Those are the base clocks. For some reason, the wattage is not showing, and it's not updating in terms of real-life clock speed as well. So I wonder...
Yeah, that's compatibility issues right now. We had some of those issues when M-series chips came out as well. The problem here is, though, that this is not Qualcomm's first like ARM chip for Windows. Like, we've had like 3 generations of them before that. So it's quite a shame that we still have all those issues.
Why? And here we have our scores, and this is actually quite interesting. We have 2700 compared to 2800 in terms of single core. So this one...
So this is the first
right
super relevant result, which is this is getting close to the performance of the A7 Pro. A17 Pro, I apologize, which does give you around 2,900 points for 3.0 3.78 gigahertz. This is like 4.2 gigahertz on either one core or dual cores. I believe they advertise like that highest clock speed for up to 2 cores simultaneously, which is good because you do want a lot more threads to run on a good frequency, especially for gaming. But yeah, so this is a good result. We have had some preliminary results that put it more at like 2500 or stuff like even lower, and we'll get to why we got those results. But yes, if you're running this chip at up to potentially 50 watts, now I'm not saying you will need 50 watts for a single core result, but if you are willing to give it the power, you will get 2800 points, maybe even up to 2900 in single core
percent faster,
and then
in terms of multi-core,
you'll get 14 to 15,000 in multi-core. Don't compare this ever to the base M series chips, because the base M series chips, which right now the M3 would be at 11,000, the M4 would be at 14,500. Those chips consume far less power. They're optimized for like passive cooling and things like that. So this is a competitor for like the Apple's Pro chips, and we'll get to how those compare in the future as well. Mokojik, you're saying you will see what AMD releases, which we do now have some benchmarks for for Strix points, and they are quite impressive. But we don't yet know, for example, how much more GPU performance will affect battery life, right? Because that's a little bit of the issue when you launch a chip that has the same node as your last 2 generations of APUs. So yeah, but I do think that is the right approach. And then you can also see if like more devs develop like native ARM versions of their applications. Exactly. And then even if you don't go for the X Elite, right, based on more apps having Windows on ARM, at least you can have more data thanks to that happening.
We have about 8% faster for the Samsung, so that's where it kind of becomes worth it. But in single core, it's actually not that big of a difference, so you might not have to go for the higher SKU. Now, both of these
Tipomaster, the problem is with the 1800 result is that 1800. Yeah, it depends a little. By the way, the 1800 is not a result from either of those devices. It's a result from the completely low-end SKU that is powering the VivoBook, as far as I know. That I believe at the base price, right? VivoBook, what is it? S15 X Elite. Please don't give me the German website. Please don't give me the German website. High-speed graphics. Yeah. So the VivoBook comes with the base 78 version, and if we look at its specifications, that still gives it a turbo frequency of 3.4 gigahertz, but like on all cores. But when it comes to which, by the way, I've seen the stuff where it, like all core turbo definitely isn't 3.4 gigahertz, but more like 3 or 3.2. So maybe that's a specific implementation depending on the vendor. But yeah, the VivoBook in its, I don't know if it even has a higher end configuration, but in its $1,300 config, it goes only up to 3.4 gigahertz. So that's basically the clock speeds of like a smartphone chip, and in fact the A17 clocks higher. So yeah, don't expect much from this chip. I implore you guys. I believe Samsung scores 1800 on battery in this very video. Yes, I know, but I'm saying that the preliminary results that we got on Geekbench did come from the VivoBook, right? So that device will definitely underperform the devices we are talking about right now. Guys, I do want to implore you. I am like an Apple fan, but I'm not a delusional fanboy, nor will I ever lie to you to like, oh, make Apple look good or like artificially increase the value perception of Apple or whatever. I have no desire to do any of that. I am presenting these two devices because I genuinely believe it's more interesting to see tests for the 84 and 80 version rather than the 78 version, which is quite crappy. And the Snapdragon X Plus is not yet out. At least not that. Well, I believe it will be like in Surface devices, but I don't even know if it's already like if it has reached the hands of any reviewers. So I just want to tell you that like I know there's sometimes the misconception that like, oh, it's an Apple focused channel, they will crap on anything that isn't Apple. I'm a huge fan. Like I know a shit ton about like consoles, NVIDIA, AMD GPUs, even like made deep dives, not on this channel, but for myself, about like Intel Alchemist versus Battle Mage. I try to learn all of that, and then whenever something is really interesting to me, and I hope really interesting to you, I cover it on my channel. This is why this is way more interesting to me than seeing even like VivoBook results, which I could have like covered already yesterday, but I chose not to because I thought there were so many discrepancies in early testing that I believed I would do you guys a disservice by covering it as if those are the final results. In the same way, when I covered like those preliminary like 1800 points, I always made sure to say, well, there are also like 2600 results on Geekbench 2, and we've even seen like some results in the 2800 range. So I always brought up all that context, all that nuance. You're always free to call me out if you ever feel me be dishonest, but that's really not what I'm trying to do. I will not be taking individual results and then like creating a big story out of it. That's not who I am. And even if you see me sometimes doing jokes on Twitter, maybe based on one result or whatever, those are jokes. That is never my full-on coverage. That is never my the kind of content you see during my live streams. This is not how I interact with you guys coming in to watch. I respect that a lot. I love you for that. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that up. Mokochik, sorry, I'm using a translator so you can understand me correctly. I made a mistake when translated. I had to write it twice. It's no problem. I know many people do that. I have like a lot of viewers coming from India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. Like I myself am like a native Russian speaker living in Germany, so English is kind of my third language, but I also try to do my best. So let's continue.
Slower than Apple's M3 and a lot slower than the M4 in terms of single core, so they do have some improvement to do there. And now with that said, let me unplug both of these and run them again to see what kind of battery life we are gonna get. By the way, I am gonna make sure they're both in the performance mode. All right, the on battery test finished, and holy smokes, guys, this is very impressive. The Surface barely slowed down. Looking at the multi-core, 14,200.
Yeah, this is why I'm saying the Surface is definitely like the most premium device out there right now when it comes to the Snapdragon X Elite. The VivoBook is explicitly like tuned for the lowest end version, and the Samsung always underperforms unfortunately with their Galaxy books. But then this is how you get those discrepancies. This is why Microsoft can ask for a disproportionately high price, and this is why they do have some level of respect in the industry, because they can say like, look, you might get the mid processor with us, but we are cooling it properly. We have like created firmware where it works well, whether it's in the balanced mode or like in the high performance mode. So yeah, I definitely can see why many people would look at like, oh, the Surface is more expensive than those other devices, but at least I get higher like quality of life things on it. Mo Kotik, you're from Belarus. Say, oh my God, that's so amazing. I lived my childhood in Belarus. Uh, I'm from Slonim, if that tells you anything. That's amazing, and of course I've been to Minsk and stuff like that. So yeah, I was born in Moldova, but my grandparents lived in Belarus, so I spent quite a lot of time there as a child. So that's amazing to have my first Belarus watcher. That actually means quite a lot to me.
On battery power. Who would have known? I mean, a lot of people are buying this Samsung specifically because it's the only one with the top SKU, but on battery power, this one is beating it, the 13-inch model. And now the last test I want to do is put these to their
cat simulation, also a neighbor to my home country, saying hello from Romania. Hello, brother or sister, I don't know from your name, but yeah, welcome, guys. It's an Eastern European convention here.
Efficient mode, so I have recommended on the Surface, and we have best power efficiency on the Samsung, and let's redo it again. All right, what the heck? Holy smokes, guys, I cannot believe this. The Samsung's performance got butchered. 8,700.
This is M2 level now, right? We are now so far below M3. It's basically not funny. And obviously, you know that an M4 iPad Pro, which is 5.1 millimeters thick, I remind you guys, and has like half the battery capacity of these devices, will deliver you 14,000 points without any tuning, and then still give you like a solid 10 hours of battery life, because the OS is smart enough to know where to allocate resources. So, and by the way, guys, we are now streaming for almost an hour. I do want to remind you, I don't want to be annoying, but it does help a lot. Please subscribe. It helps out tremendously. Like the video. Let us go 1-to-1 with the amount of people watching and the amount of likes we have on the stream. It obviously helps us with the algorithm. It attracts new viewers. Share it out to anybody who you think might enjoy the video. You can see how much I enjoy a lively live chat, so please feel free to comment what you agree with, what you disagree with, what you'd like to see me cover else or differently. And if you want to support me directly, you can leave a super chat or a super sticker right while I'm live. Or if you want to consider supporting me directly in the long term, you can find my Patreon link in the description.
100 multis? What? Are you joking? The single core or only
Oh my god, below. This is why I'm saying, guys, this is why preliminary results might be crappy, and sometimes they are still correct, and sometimes they're the result of like the VivoBook having like the lowest end configured X Elite, but sometimes they're the result of Samsung saying, oh, you know what, we need to advertise 24 hours of battery life, so how about we clock it like 1/3 lower or 40% lower, whatever works to get us to that. This is where I believe advertising kind of wins over actual engineering, because there's no reason to do that. Like, except for getting even a few more minutes of battery life, I cannot imagine anything that would justify this. I'm not in any way a Mac fanboy, but 10K can feel so much different in Mac versus Windows. What is 10K? You mean like the results? You mean like the benchmarks results, or is it like a specific application? Like if you like had written 40K, then I would know it's the game, but that's obviously a different story. It wasn't enough for Samsung to mess up their own Exynos SoC. That's brutal, man, but I agree.
1,500, that's like a flippin' Android phone. What is this?
What a great diss, by the way. Like, this is where you know that as much as they were sucking up to Qualcomm in the pre-release to the X Elite, like saying stuff like, oh, it's like an Android smartphone, that's quite a brutal insult. Yeah, you're saying a score of 10K, yeah. Yeah, this is where I believe the M3 definitely like crossed like the Rubicon when it comes to multi-threaded performance at like 11,000, and then the M4 just jumped over that, where it's like it way overdoes it to what most people would need on such a base level config. In fact, like even the 13,000 point that you get like with the binned M4, yeah, this is where we really get into like very comfortable results for years and years and years.
Compared to the Surface, yeah, it dropped down from 2600 to 2200. It did go down, but not nearly as much as the Samsung. The multi-core barely went down less than 2,000 points. That's in the most efficient mode on battery. What is Samsung doing? Maybe it's because of the 16-inch display size. They're trying to get as much battery.
Yeah, the problem with Mokotek saying that like, oh, it potentially reaches like, what did they say? They said like it reaches like 3,200 in single core. Some are saying it reaches like 17,000 in on like a multi-core on Linux. The problem is that Linux is a very, very different operating system than Windows or Mac. Not even from its technological foundation, because obviously it shares the Unix base with Mac OS. But the problem is it's treated so differently from like reviewers, and there's like different levels of performance overhead because the system is designed for very different stuff. You cannot compare that, right? Even Apple, that writes like very obviously like to the metal, this is why they call their API metal, with their chips, they cannot quite do the same like, oh, our OS is so light and fluffy and it jumps through a meadow of flowers or whatever, right? I wouldn't compare results that are created on Linux versus those created on Windows or on Mac, unless of course those results directly affect you, which would be like time sensitive results or like for like professional apps or frame rates in games, because obviously it doesn't matter how you got there. If the result is better, that's all that matters. Geekbench in of itself, while representative often, is still an artificial benchmark. So artificial benchmarks between completely different architectures is already complicated, but then in completely different operating systems. And then you also have to consider that not all developers optimize for those systems on the same level. That's a little bit iffy to me.
Performance as possible, and they're probably using this setup for their battery numbers that they're advertising. What the heck is this? Yep. And now I've put them back into best performance mode. Let's actually run Speedometer's 3.0 web browsing benchmark to kind of see the general snappiness of...
I've seen like some like x86 fanboys shit on this benchmark for some reason, where they're like, I'm not benchmarking browsers, or like Burberber, it's not a game, Burberber, it's not a pro app. It's like because Apple wins in this benchmark, right, by quite a lot, and like my browser was fast enough 10 years ago. I'm like, yeah, that's not the point though. That's not the point of this test. It's about like how it will behave in the future and stuff like that, and it's about general responsiveness. And by the way, if your chip is super responsive in the browser, you can actually maybe not use all its power, but maybe like 70 or 80%. Now it sits way more comfortably on the performance per watt curve, and now you can actually get a lot better battery life. So efficiency of today is performance tomorrow, but it's already battery life today. That's what I always say. And like raw performance today can even be battery life today, because by underclocking that chip, or just by, well, underclocking sounds manual, but even if the firmware does it by itself, then you can still hope that it will give you like great efficiency, because you reduced by clock speeds by like 10%, but potentially reduced with that power consumption by like 10 or 25, by like 20 or 25%.
The systems, and if there's any difference between these two SKUs. And look at that, we have our score. The mid-tier SKU is...
Yeah, like Microsoft just butchers this device. I just also like from the design perspective, you can see Microsoft has like that cleaner looking hinge. You know that the new trackpad has like the haptics. I wish it was even bigger, but especially on the larger models, but it's still better, I believe, than whatever Samsung would have. Unfortunately, Samsung is not anywhere close to Apple when it comes to things like speakers, unfortunately, but their cameras are usually quite good. So yeah, as a complete package, I would prefer the probably the Surface, except for the screen, which I believe is better on the Galaxy Book.
Slightly faster, 28.6 compared to 28.2. Wow, I wonder why Samsung is limiting the performance on the battery, because like in Geekbench, it's slightly slower. And if you're interested in speedometer 2.1, I just ran that as well, and same thing. The Surface 13.8 inch with the mid-tier SKU is a little bit faster. And now, of course, let's test out Cinebench 2024, the new version.
And I'll always say that before we look at something involving Cinebench. Cinebench in R23 was garbage optimized for ARM. It's way better in 2024, but it's still not anywhere close to the deep optimization it has for x86, especially since it's not just Cinema 4D that is being optimized for x86, but it's specifically Intel and AMD optimizing their chips for Cinebench, knowing that it's a very popular benchmark used by like PC hardware reviewers. So yeah, it's very interesting because obviously the scaling will probably be correct between those two chips, but whenever people want to bring up like Cinebench, which is funny because Cinebench now on Apple Silicon is tremendous, but whenever people would want to say maybe like compare like the X Elite versus Cinebench results for like Strix Point and Lunar Lake at some point, I would still be careful. Even I'm not a huge fan of the X Elite necessarily, I still believe it deserves fair treatment and it deserves the nuance that like, yeah, some benchmarks will almost by default run not that well on it.
And we're gonna do a single run of the single core first. And here we go, finally the single thread is done. We have 121 on the Surface, 127 on the Samsung. That's actually 5% faster. So you are getting actually some sort of a difference here.
I mean, yeah, but that is completely negligible. 5% you would never pay. Like even in the GPU space where like NVIDIA offers like 25 million SKUs at this point, you probably would never pay for more for something that only gives you like 5% sometimes.
Or realistic real-world Cinebench. And now let's do the multi-core test. And wait a second, guys. I'm hearing some fans. Okay, I'm hearing some weird whistling from the Samsung.
Oh no!
It's really annoying kind
please
of
don't tell me.
sound.
Please don't tell me
Whereas the Surface,
they have coil vine
now,
on
but it's nice and smooth. No
on the
whistling,
Galaxy
no weird
Book.
high-pitched
No,
noises.
no.
Yeah, guys, this is so annoying.
This is what I'm
high-pitched
saying.
noise.
Like there are always some weird quality issues. Not like device breaking quality issues, but you always have something on Galaxy Books because it's not a fully refined product. Like for years, Samsung basically didn't bother with laptops at all, and then they were like, "Oh, we don't know. Do we want them to make them Intel based or AMD based?" So they never fully figured out like which like motherboards to make that well, to be honest. And now there's the issue. Now it's a brand new platform, but they're reusing a lot of the other stuff that they have done for the Galaxy Book. Have they optimized drivers for all the hardware inside? It's like, and then of course, given just the fact that they care less about those devices, that's how you end up with something like Coilvine, which like Coilvine will happen on any device at some point. Sometimes it's if in the like lower price category you basically accept it, even on consoles to a degree, but like this is a problem. This is a premium device. It has like the highest end version. If it either has like very unbalanced fans that create a high-pitched noise, or it has like Coilvine from the power supply and whatever, that is a huge quality of life problem.
The Samsung. It is bugging me so much right now.
Yeah,
what?
I
Can you
hate
guys
that
believe
sound.
it?
I was always so anxious about if my PS5 was ever gonna have Coilvine, and it does when it's like 40 degrees Celsius summer, because that's when the power supply has to work beyond like its efficiency range. But the rest of the time, I'm happy it doesn't. I couldn't imagine living with a laptop that does it.
Surface just finished first. The middle SKU, the 80, compared to the 84. No way. Okay, we got the scores. 906 points for the Surface and 867 for the Samsung with the top SKU. That's 4.5% faster. I just can't believe so many people are buying the Samsung because it's the only one available with the top X Elite SKU, but it turns out
Yeah, this is Mokotic. This is a very good point to bring up, and I think as I keep covering like the X Elite and devices that have it, they're like individual points. You can already see like here, like the Surface is outperforming the higher end chip in a smaller device that has a mid-range chip, right? Or mid variant of that same chip. But then you have like discrepancies like what's the speaker quality, what's like the general device sturdiness, right? Build quality. And those little things often don't show up as much on the spec sheet. This is why the MacBook Air, for example, if you compare it to the VivoBook in terms of like raw cost, it looks terrible, right? For like the same $12.99, the MacBook Air at 15 inch, right? Because the VivoBook is 15 inches, right? That one doesn't have OLED. It doesn't have 120 hertz. It comes with half as much RAM. It comes with 1/4 as much storage. But when you then go into the details, yes, the VivoBook will still be better like raw value when it comes to hardware. I think the storage especially is a big argument here. But then when you think about like if you actually have the money, right? And MacBooks are often available at a discount very quickly. So you can get like an M3 MacBook Air if it's like the 15 inch for like $1150 or something like that. So around 10% cheaper. So maybe even if it gets to like $1,800, at which point you would have the same amount of RAM and the same amount of storage, but you still don't have the OLED screen. Well, now you have all those other things, right? The actual battery life, the consistency of experience, the speakers, the microphones, the camera, the fact that it even has like Thunderbolt ports versus USB 4, all those little things, even like the quality of MagSafe and how that works, and of course the integration into Apple's ecosystem versus now having potentially deal with all that Microsoft Copilot crap. And yeah, this is where then value gets created and where people might not even consider anymore something like the VivoBook, which is a shame. But this is also the fault of Microsoft, because for years, Microsoft has not bothered to make like Windows super efficient in standby. They have not bothered to make Windows boot instant on, even on very modern chips. They have not bothered to make Windows like be like clutter free and super efficient. It's just like it's a thing that obviously where Apple not wins, but where they compete much stronger than they should, given the high prices they ask for. CAD simulation, your MacBook Air M1 with 8 gigabytes is 2 years old and works and feels like a brand new one. I always tell that to people, my Romanian brother. I have an M1 iPad Pro, and I do have the 8 gig version. I do have it with 256 gigs of storage, so I didn't go crazy on it. No 16 gigs of RAM, whatever, no 1 terabyte of storage, and I love it. Like when it comes to general browsing, it's super responsive. It handles all my email. Never set up even my emails on my Mac because I love doing it on my iPad. It still like does all the iOS things. As I said before, I just played Assassin's Creed Mirage on it just today. So yeah, I absolutely can understand you. Like people have like this perception of what a piece of hardware should be, but then they don't ask how it actually behaves, right? You tell them something has 8 gigs of RAM, and they forget that swap from SSD exists, and that Macs have like a good compression and decompression engine that handles data flow from CPU very well and very efficiently too. Now, obviously, it's not great that it's at 8 gigabytes. You would want maybe 12, maybe 16 or more, right? But it doesn't mean that 8 will be crap, and macOS by itself uses less RAM than Windows. Most applications on macOS use a little bit less RAM than Windows. and then of course once you go beyond that and like to the M3, and you have features like dynamic caching and stuff like that, you have a lot of cache in general on those chips, which also helps out a lot, which is like so yeah, I fully am on board with you. Tipo Master, I would take a snow leopard year on every major OS by every company right now. Well, the problem is Microsoft is not like releasing Windows 11 and then Windows 12 a year after. They should be actually on like a snow leopard or like an iOS 12 release cadence. It's just like they had like 3 years or something like that now to like fully refine Windows 11. They just didn't do it because in the background they were actually more working on stuff like Copilot. You cannot actually blame the time. I think you have to blame like the management of the development. And this is why one of the major guys who was doing like the Windows 11 presentations, he left. I don't know where he is, at Adobe or something like that. But he was like the one guy that I liked because I liked some of the design elements of Windows 11. This is why I always have like Windows 11 as like a virtual machine waiting for me in parallel. But yeah, overall, it's a mess. Now I just bought a MacBook Pro M3 Pro, 18 gigabytes, and for normal use, there's no difference between. Yeah, that's exactly right. Like you can maybe benefit from the better screen and stuff like that, but when it comes to booting up, like loading up like a web page or loading up an email, you shouldn't feel the difference unless you have like another super computationally expensive or RAM expensive task in the background. This is why when people tell me like I have like 50 billion tabs always open in Chrome, I'm like, that's good for you, but now it's up to you to decide how much do you want to spend on keeping all those tabs always open. I don't do it. I still paid for 32 gigs of RAM on my M1 Max MacBook Pro, right? I live with some of the compromises that came with having an M1 Max, like having lower battery life than if I had bought the M1 Pro version, right? But I do play around with things like emulators. I actually use those extra GPU cores. And I was willing to spend the money and take the hit in some areas. Are you actually willing to say that like you running like 20 Chrome tabs and 3 videos simultaneously while handling all your other stuff? Well, are you willing to pay more for that? Do you want more RAM? You cannot just say, oh, I want the base version to do everything I want. If you're not a typical user, you will not be targeted, at least not at the price point you might want. Brickbag Bertrand Soleil, yeah, I loved his accent, and I loved his presentation style. I think Crack is super cool, but I would love like a Bertrand Soleil for like the other stuff too, right? But for now, we have like Craig that introduces software, and I think John Turnus is doing a really good job introducing more and more of Apple's hardware, and I do believe he will be Apple's CEO at some point. But I think we are kind of overdue a guy with like a super cool accent like Bertrand Soleil. Yeah, and he had like a warm presentation style while still seeming professional. He was a little bit like a French accent Phil Schiller. So yeah, they had a good vibe with each other as well, all those guys. I just set Safari to close one day all tabs. Yeah, I agree.
Now, you don't really have to. 4.5% faster with this one. You know what? Let's actually run the 10-minute test to give this larger 16-inch chassis some time to shine because the thermals should be...
No, Mokotic, I have to disagree with you here. Saying like Microsoft could bring down Windows Mobile and do virtual support for Android apps. This is... you have to understand, all of this stuff is ridiculously expensive and like to make a new platform, to create the actual software, to partner with like device makers that will actually put out smartphones with that OS, and all of that is opportunity cost, right? Because those developers, those engineers at your company could have been working on something else, on something with a much more guaranteed like profit, like AI stuff. I think it could work, right? But this is the same discussion we always have with like the Xbox, right? Where people are saying, well, Microsoft now has so many studios, they could make their games exclusive to Xbox and make the Xbox console like successful again. But the question is like, why would they do that? Those games sell well on PC. They sell way better on PlayStation than they do on Xbox. Now that Microsoft has basically tasted the blood of software revenue, they're not willing to go back to a hardware loss leading business model with the Xbox console. And the same goes with Windows Phone. If they can just port their popular apps to Android and then at some point maybe create like a store there, which I have no idea why anybody would want to use a Microsoft built store on Android, but I think that's their aspiration. So the opportunity cost is just too big. This is like a years long endeavor. It would take like hundreds and thousands of engineers and developers. It would take partnering with like everyone from Samsung, HTC, which like is bringing out a smartphone out of nowhere. I was gonna say LG, but LG doesn't exist anymore. But like Xiaomi, Huawei not. Huawei is under sanctions. Motorola. There aren't actually even that many companies who would accept that because they don't just run Android, they run their own Android skin. So making those companies now suddenly run like a clean OS like Windows without like the guarantee that it will be a long-term success the way they know that an Android device would be, that is just super expensive. They can bring back continuing support and then you can have a powerful phone in which you can both work and make calls. But like Samsung DeX exists, Android already does like a lot of stuff like that. Microsoft builds tablets. They tried stuff like Duo and whatever. The question with all of that is like, does it maybe make more sense for them just to use Android themselves and then put out like Surface like phones and Surface tablets?
Better, right? It's a 16-inch compared to a 13.8-inch, and it has
by
the
tablets,
top SKU.
I mean like something that would be below like a Surface Pro.
Start.
Right?
All right, it's
like
been over 10 minutes, and I want to do a quick thermal test right here on the Surface.
But even then, we had like the Surface Go.
We have 47 degrees on the Surface laptop, 46 right there. We got a hotspot. And
this is one thing I wanted to. I don't know if it's a correction for Vadim. Thermals on the outside mean very little because sometimes a better cool device will be hotter on the outside because the cooling system transports the heat from the chip more effectively to the outside. And maybe if that cooling system is so confident in itself, it won't ramp up the fans right away to maximum speeds to not annoy you, and then the chassis will stay warm, but it won't like cook your device or anything just because it's warm outside, nor will it cook your fingers. This thought that like, oh, device is cooler outside, that means it's better internally, that is not true. But the application on Windows will be able to run through Prism virtualization. It sounds like a good idea to me, but yeah, it's expensive and risky. Well, yeah, that's the point. Expensive and risky is not something companies really like, especially if they're now worth $3.3 trillion thanks to AI. They don't want to like invest into platforms where they would have to like rewrite all their tools again and whatever. They would have to find all the partners and things like that. While I do appreciate the idea, believe me, I do want more competition myself on the smartphone market, but Microsoft will not enter it again, not as like a platform holder.
Over on the whoa, look at what?
I believe it's far more likely we get like a company like Huawei becoming like a platform holder inside China, where it's easier anyway because so much is like just built on WeChat and whatever. And then like Chinese vendors basically like using then their OS or whatever inside China, but then using Android everywhere else. And then I believe that that will be our most likely competition, which sucks because believe me, I don't want CCP affiliated companies being our major new competitors, but I would believe that this is the most likely scenario. If we ever get like a company that breaks Apple's and Google's duopoly, and even then I don't think they will ever reach more than 15 or 20% market share, I believe that will come from the Chinese market.
Only 40 degrees Celsius. That is a big difference on the Samsung Book 4 Edge. Why the heck is it that big?
You can, by the way, you can see that the Surface laptop, it might be hotter, yes, but it's also dissipating its heat over a relatively large area, especially given that it's a smaller device. Yeah, I don't know. Like those thermals on the outside always seemed like a weird test to me.
46 degrees Celsius? 40. What? We finally got a score and I cannot believe it, guys. 855 points for the Surface with the mid-tier SKU, 857 on the Samsung, only 2 points higher despite being the better SKU in a 16-inch laptop with a bunch of thermal headroom. Samsung could have pushed the chip harder, went up to 46, 47 degrees Celsius if they wanted to, but why are they not?
Well, this is the issue sometimes with Max Tech, which is like, guys, where are the thermals for the actual processor? Because that is, as I said, way more important than the thermals on the actual on the outside. But yeah, I mean, I can see his point though, because I think obviously if the device was like cooking his hands, then I think he would understand that it's basically like thermally saturated and stuff like that. Soaked, I believe it's called. What do you think happens with the chip was in the long term? I thought the point was to bring China to the negotiation table, but it seems like foundries and ISAs will just be forked if we keep on. Do you mean if we do you mean if like the industry stays like antagonistic between like the US and China wanting to at some point potentially take over Taiwan? Is that what you mean? Or do you mean like something specific about China, like what Huawei is doing, or like how their own competition looks like? Because it's a very broad topic and I don't want to waste too much time talking about it.
In the best performance mode in a 16-inch larger chassis that should dissipate heat better. I am so disappointed in this 16-inch Book 4 Edge. And at this point, I'm having a hard time figuring out why anybody would buy this instead of the...
Yeah, I don't see a point in the Galaxy Book. I see a point in the Vivo Book because it's so cheap, and I see somewhat of a point in the Surface because it's just a better built device than either one, but it then gets so expensive. At that point, you really have to consider alternatives, in my opinion.
Surface, after all these tests that we've just done, I can't believe how well this thing is performing.
I was worried that my microphone is on mute.
Graphics
Couldn't
testing.
tell the color
Alrighty,
from the
we
side.
have 3D Mark's wild.
Okay, this is where we get to some like GPU testing. Again, no idea what the translation overhead is, or if those are like native versions. It's really hard to like, maybe I should like go into my Windows virtual machine and see what stuff there is optimized for Windows on ARM and what isn't. But yeah, as I said, I'm not a huge fan of all like GFX bench and 3D Mark benchmarks, but it's at least good to have more data always.
Extreme gaming benchmark. This is very well optimized for mobile platforms and ARM chips.
This is a discussion that I've had with Vadim a lot on Twitter over the years. Or the months. It's this idea that 3D Mark and GFX Bench are well optimized because basically they're convenient. It's a logical fallacy in my opinion here, because he believes, well, people are using them, that means they're relevant. That is not true for artificial benchmarks. They don't represent any specific game, any specific engine. They don't optimize for the latest version of either Vulkan nor Metal. And they do work really well on Qualcomm. However, the issue is though that like you also get to the point of questioning, is like Qualcomm optimizing like their chips to work really well with those benchmarks the same way like Intel and AMD optimize for a Cinebench and CSGO, right? No DX9 game has ever gotten as much support as CSGO did, because they just wanted to push the frame rates even more, and like then like AMD launched their Zen X3D chips and with Vcache and stuff like that, and you almost wonder, are some of those benchmarks really overperforming because the GPU inside the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 and Gen 3 is actually better, or so much better than than the A16 and the A17 Pro? Or is it more that it's a super old benchmark that Qualcomm actually optimizes for and Apple couldn't give two shits about?
Silicon and Android phones as well. So
and I'm not saying that because Apple loses. I'm saying that because their results never correspond with like real world result. There is no game out there where Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 outperforms the A17 Pro by like 40%. That just doesn't exist.
The Wildlife Extreme Unlimited test, which is not going to count the resolution into it. And what the heck? It just had an error occur on the Samsung.
Yeah, compatibility issue.
It's just fine. So I
will be different between devices running different firmware and drivers.
Is a little bit faster. We have 40.89 FPS compared to 38.09. That's about 7.35% faster in terms.
I mean, that's still disappointing though, given that it should be like around 20% more.
In terms of graphics, so that is definitely a nice improvement. But in a 16-inch laptop, that still isn't that great. And of course, the X Elite is definitely not the best in terms of graphics performance, because we've tested the M4 iPad Pro that has about 52 FPS, so it's quite a lot faster. Of course, that's not in any.
And again, the Adreno GPUs do way better proportionate to their real-world results in this test than Apple's A and M series chips.
Laptops yet. It will be later this year, but I'd say it's definitely good enough for general computing and maybe some low-end gaming, but not anything high-end. And I just checked the M2 and the M3 MacBook Air, which of course are available. The M3 got 42 FPS, so it's beating out even the best SKU of the X Elite. The M2 MacBook Air got 34.2, so it's a little bit slower than this SKU.
But that we actually had some other benchmarks, like even in the initial rollout, like the initial presentations, where this will come in. Like I fully believe that this like binned X Elite with what was its performance targets in terms of teraflops at like 3.8 teraflops will underperform the 10-core GPU version of the M2 processor. I fully believe that. These values may be higher when the native version of 3D Mark comes out. I'm not relying on these results too much. We have had by now some other benchmarks. I'm just reacting to whatever Vadim is saying. I cannot magically bring up all numbers at once. You see, this is already a 1.5 hour live stream reacting to a 20-minute video. We will be reacting to a lot more content. However, as I said, the GPU overhead for stuff like this is significantly smaller, and we do have an application that already has a history of optimization for mobile. So it is not quite the same disparity that we would see in like if they ran Elden Ring or something like that through the translation layer. If anyone didn't know, Adreno is an anagram for Radeon. AMD sold those rights just before the mobile boom. Really? I don't know if you're pulling my leg, but that sounds interesting. And it's all the more interesting now that like AMD is working with Samsung on integrating like Radeon architectures like RDNA 2 and 3 in their mobile chips. So definitely some competition afoot there.
So that's actually quite surprising. But since Wildlife Extreme is more of a mobile benchmark, let's run the brand new Steel Nomad Lite, which is more modern, has heavier workloads. And wow, there you go. Now this Samsung is
big if true, Tipo Master, as they say.
Finally starting to shine. It's 17.6% higher in terms of
Yeah, this is why I'm saying this test is like so much better than anything else we do have. Like, well, it is a 3D Mark test, so I'll give them some respect. I'll criticize them for not having had this kind of test like 2 or 3 years ago by now, but it is better late than never. And then GFX Bench just doesn't contribute anything, in my opinion, to a smart benchmark discussion these days.
17.51 compared to 14.88. Now we're starting to see a difference with that higher end SKU. And you know what? For the last part of this test, let's actually run the stress test because I really want to see how big of a difference there will be if you're putting a graphics load on them. Maybe this thing will shine even more and it'll be much more worth it. Let's run it. So this stress test has been running for 15 minutes out of the full 20, and I do want to check up on these thermals. Let's take a look. We have 39 degrees Celsius on the surface and 36 degrees Celsius, 37 on the Samsung with the higher end GPU. That is very interesting. Once again, 39 degrees Celsius. Well, what does that tell me? That tells me that the GPU is underpowered compared to the CPU, which can actually get this thing up to 46, 47 degrees Celsius.
GPU also sometimes has different fan curves and firmware. Again, making those kinds of conclusions based on the external temperature of a device, it's not a very good metric.
Celsius. There is a ton of thermal headroom in.
By the way, I just want to point out, I'm so glad the MacBook Air exists, right? And I don't mean like the MacBook Air right now because it's the best device ever, but like that aluminum like chassis design that is now almost everywhere, and it even helps with like cooling to a degree. I just love it so much. I prefer it so much over cheap plasticky designs. Even if you do like a thin aluminum layer, it's still better in my opinion. So yeah, I want to give out some appreciation points for those devices continuing a great design legacy, and especially the Surface, which looks like a MacBook Air, like an older wedge design MacBook Air.
These laptops, but the GPU is not powerful enough to maximize it. All right, the stress test is finished, and it looks like the Samsung with the top-end X Elite SKU had a 20% higher score. So for graphics, it looks like that SKU is definitely worth it over the mid-tier version. Now,
guys, a little time has passed, so I feel like I deserve to annoy you a little bit. Please consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel. Both things help out the algorithm tremendously. Share it out to anybody who you think might enjoy this content. As always, be very lively in the live chat. That's what it's here for. And if you want to support me directly, leave a super chat, leave a super sticker, or subscribe to my Patreon, for which you can find a link in the description of this channel.
Both of these, the stability in terms of frame rate was very, very good, almost no difference at all, which means that neither of these machines were throttled.
Yeah, those devices are like optimized for like 50 watts combined output. This GPU will never be capable of hitting 50 watts. Even if you like overclock it, at that point you will just stop gaining performance. Yeah, it should never get thermally soaked by this kind of GPU benchmark.
The chassis, basically no issues at all. These could easily handle more power, but the X Elite just does not give it. So now with all of that tested and compared, let's answer the original question.
Yeah, I will refrain from showing any kind of like conclusions by now. There is one video that I really wanted to react to. I don't know if I'll get to all of it. Where's my downloads? Yeah, here. Because I did want to react to the Matt Talks Tech video comparing Snapdragon X Elite versus an M3 MacBook Pro. So that's actually pretty cool. We do have more stuff, like Notebook Check, I think, has done a good overview. I think Dave 2D has given even us like some battery life numbers, but I do want to wait with some of that stuff a little bit because I do believe we are still about to get like Microsoft Copilot, which will probably also eat more into stuff like battery life. So I just wanted to go into this and see how it actually fares against Apple's well, not greatest, but what is already out there.
So then guys, this is a day I've been really looking forward to here. We have here the brand new Samsung Galaxy 4 Edge, and it has inside of it a Snapdragon Elite X inside of it. And
Well, X Elite, but I'll
we're going
forgive
to
you.
compare it, or do a versus to the MacBook Pro M3 that we
I
have
didn't
right
watch that
here.
video
I've
yet,
decided to
this
compare
video
these
yet.
two models with their features.
By the way, we do have a pretty good clean look at the Galaxy Book here. They're doing this thing where like the corners are rounded. And now that we know, obviously, that the MacBooks don't do that, right? They round the corners here, but then they're like sharp here because the device here is sharp. And I don't know, it now just feels wrong to see devices like this.
Because I believe that the Samsung Galaxy Book 4 Edge is probably more closer to a MacBook Pro than, say, a MacBook Air with an M3 inside of it.
That
And
is
also the price
correct.
too
That
a
is
little bit
why
more
I
close.
think that a lot of people are wrongly comparing these new devices to the MacBook Air. Even if they're sometimes close in price, the MacBook Air still has a very distinct focus on like thin and light, a fanless design. It attracts this, and it's also like a very convenient, well-tested product, while these devices definitely are somewhat experimental for the Windows space. So I do believe they're way more competitive, like not competitive, but designed to compete with a MacBook Pro than the MacBook Air. And obviously with the MacBook Pro, we then do get to choose at like $1,600 the M3 or at like $2,000 the M3 Pro.
Closer towards that end as well. And the other question you might
Guys,
be asking is,
as
well,
always, please let me know. Can you hear everything well? Is the video stream quality okay? Because to me, this is a little bit low on volume in comparison to the MaxTech video, but I don't know if that's the YouTube specific volume, which is what you hear, or if that's the way I tuned my earpods.
not just do, say, a
Kevin O'Reilly asking, what's up, Steven? Who is Steven?
Surface Book with a 13.6-inch display. Well, again,
What?
I don't think, in my
I'm
opinion, for this
confused.
testing, that's fair either, because both of these are essentially a 14-inch display. We have a 14-inch display here and a 14.2-inch display, and I think that's a bit more closer there to do a comparison. So that's why I've decided to do both of these models. And at the end of the day, we always say that Apple's biggest rival
Thank
out
you.
there is
Thank you for
Samsung.
letting me know
They
you can
make
hear
Windows,
everything
and they
well.
also make Android phones. So I thought, why not? Let's do it this way. So first of all, the unboxing. So the Samsung came in a lovely white box, as we can see here. It's got lots of logos, descriptions.
Yeah, I
things
don't care about
have a
that.
look here, starting out with the Galaxy Book 4. Overall, the design of the Galaxy Book is beautiful. It is really nice and slick. It's an all-metal design here, by the way, what you've got here. And I do really like it. Probably the only thing I probably don't like too much is probably the chin here on the bottom of the screen. But that's
Yeah, it's a
about
16
it.
by 9 screen, right? Not even 16 by 10. I hate just the fact that like at this point, make those side bezels thicker so they're the same thickness as the top bezel. But now you have like 3 differently sized bezels. That just looks terrible. It's okay, Kevin. Now that you know Mark is the presenter and leader of Mark Tag, that's good to know. It's all good. I was just honestly a little confused because I thought you were like calling out Matt, but then it was like, but his name is Matt, not Steven. You have the Galaxy Book Go, which has LTE and is great. 14 hours of battery life. What chip is it running? Is it one of the 8CX chips, or can you get an x86 chip with like cellular connectivity? And is it an older one? Is that why it's LTE and not 5G? And yeah, those bezels be though thick, boy. And it's like, I'm sorry, but it has like a fat booty here, and then it has like slim curves, or at least it's trying to cover up some curves, and then it has this. It's like, it's the definition of like somebody who doesn't know how to dress, is almost.
But then compared to the MacBook Pro, yeah, I do really love this design too. I love the full-out black keyboard and everything. And obviously, I would say that this MacBook Pro obviously is a bit more thicker as well in its all-metal design too. The Samsung's weight is just 1.16.
Yeah, but from everything that I've seen, this isn't as sturdy. Like, you almost get like no keyboard flex. I'm doing it right now on my MacBook Pro. You do get like less chassis stability here, basically.
Kilograms. What is about 2.
Snapdragon 7 Gen with ARM. and it's a Windows device. How does that work for you? Like, do you use that just for browsing, watching YouTube or something like that? Because I cannot imagine it like running pro apps very well.
£5 and thereabouts. Whereas the M3 MacBook Pro, well, that is 1.55 kilograms, or that's about 3.4 pounds. So yeah, that is considerably more heavier than what we've got.
Yeah, but that is weird because this device is actually, well, this device will get obviously heavier and stuff like that for things like the M3 Pro and Max, because then it has more cooling and extra fan. But to me, this device is actually optimized for like no compromised performance, even for the base M3, which, as you know, the MacBook Air will struggle to fully sustain the performance of an M3. To me, it's so weird to have a device that potentially has like a higher, like not even potentially, that actually has a higher performance processor, I should say a higher power processor, right? Be lighter, because that means that it has crappy speakers inside, or like, I mean, the battery capacity, as far as I know, in these things are very comparable. But like, yeah, this is so weird to me that how light this is, because now I'm asking, like, did they cheap out on some stuff here? It's a 2022 model, Windows 11. It's all right, use it mainly for entertainment browsing, although many apps cannot be installed, such as Chrome. But yeah, Chrome did get an ARM version. Well, I do hope you enjoy it. As I always say, I don't ever begrudge somebody's enjoyment or like choice of device. I just like to have a nuanced, fair discussion where like all those things are like, all pros and cons are brought up.
Right here with the Snapdragon, the Samsung model that we have right here. So yeah, definitely do consider that the MacBook Pro is a heavier model. But for the display, what we actually have here is a 3K OLED screen with 242 pixels per inch at 14-inch on the Samsung. The MacBook also has a 3K mini LED display, but obviously this is a 14.2-inch display, and this has got 254 pixels per inch. Both screens also go up to 120 Hz refresh rates too. Overall, I would say though, for design-wise and for the actual beauty of the screen, it is very, very close. But I am going to say this, even though I'm a big Mac fan, the OLED display just shines so well here. It is absolutely amazing. And like I said, with the iPad Pros, for example, with the OLED displays on there.
The problem is he is bringing up OLED, which I understand has its advantages. The issue, though, is like, what is actually the sustained maximum brightness level on this OLED screen? I know the VivoBook has a good OLED screen that goes up to like 500 nits, though in many tests it caps out at around 400. This goes up to 600 nits, and in regular usage you will not see the difference with like blooming or like perfect blacks as much until you get it into like a dark environment and then put like high contrast parts on one image. Wait, you ordered an M4 MacBook. An M4 MacBook does not exist. Do you mean, did you either order an M4 iPad Pro, or do you mean you plan on buying an M4 MacBook Pro?
Compared to the mini LED, you can see the difference, and it is a beautiful display. And I'm afraid to say, even though maybe the pixels per inch are slightly less here on this OLED display on the Samsung, it is better than what we have with the M3 MacBook Pro with the mini LED display.
I have no problem with that conclusion. I'll just say, when it comes to a really premium thing, I just cannot wait to get tandem OLED on the MacBooks. And then I hope they also do one last jump when it comes to pixel density, and give us like full 4K screens on those laptops. Maybe like 4K on a 14.5-inch screen with even smaller bezels, and then like a 4.5K on a 16-inch or something like that. Because I believe that is... that will be the final pixel density you need. I always believe that like 250, 260 ppi, it's good on a tablet that you can also hold like further away from you. But when I have like my laptop on my actual lap, I can see the pixels a little more there.
So like I said, the design is thinner, a bit more sleek, and lighter too. So I am going to have to win.
Don't worry, Kevin. I hope you enjoy your M3 MacBook too.
One other thing to mention about the Samsung over what the MacBook does not have, and that is it does also have a touchscreen too.
I don't care. I have completely given up on caring in the slightest about touchscreens on such large devices, on a 16:9 aspect ratio screen. with like so much crap in the way. I obviously understand why like a Surface Pro has like a touch screen, and I can even understand why like a 13-inch device will have like a touch screen. Maybe with just enough tolerance you can get it to be like a tablet for you, but like this, no, this holds absolutely no value for me with a touch screen. I know that because I have interacted a lot with laptop touchscreens. I have known people who were like showing off to me saying, oh look, I bought this Windows laptop, look, it has touch. Your 3,000 euro Mac doesn't have it. And then like I asked them a month later, do you ever actually use the touch screen? They're like, no. They're like, I used it like almost accidentally when I like think of like using a smartphone, but then the user experience is worse than using a trackpad, and especially if you compare it to like the high quality large trackpad that you get on the Mac, now the user experience is like completely different. Touchscreen is just an advertising gimmick on laptops. Yeah, if you want touchscreen, buy a tablet. I absolutely agree, or at least get like a convertible that is like decently sized. What is the point of a 16-inch? Like, it's not like this device is like fully optimized for like a super low latency great stylus or something like that, which at least that would be something for like maybe pro artists or whatever. But this way, no, it holds zero value for me with a touchscreen, or the touchscreen holds zero value for me on this device, to be more precise.
But moving on to the ports then on both of these models, and let's talk about the Samsung first of all. What we have here on the side is a HDMI port, 2.1 port, and we also had
HDMI port. I love that. What kind of accent is that? Can anybody tell? I always forget which like English accent pronounces it H instead of H.
The microphone port here, but on the other side we only have two USB 4.0 ports too, and do remember that you would have to use one of those USB-C ports for charging if need be. The MacBook Pro with the M3 though, on the other hand, that's a bit of a different story though. This also has a HDMI 2.1 port, but this also has two USB 4.0 ports.
Yeah, I mean, we know all of that, and I can tell you that in the terms of ports, even the base M3 MacBook Pro is obviously better, but then it gets way better on the M3 Pro and M3 Max variants, which have like faster HDMI, one extra Thunderbolt port. We also have like something like the new VivoBook, I believe, launched with like a micro SD card slot that only goes up to like 30 megabit or something like that. The MacBook Pro has like a full-sized SD card slot. Even like the 3.5 millimeter jack inside MacBooks is pretty decent. So you're saying he has a British accent. It does kind of sound a tad bit Scottish. Is that maybe like my misconception? Storage upgrades.
This for about the last sort of 8 years or so. So there's no easy upgrades here unless you get a soldering iron out and you're really, really good with it.
Yeah.
The Samsung, though, on the other hand, has one of these inside of it. This here is an NVMe.
My issue sometimes, though, is like it's unless you take out the NVMe and you either resell it, or which is weird because I don't see much value in the kind of integrated NVMe that is in there, but or you create like almost like your own external storage solution with that NVMe. I dislike it when laptops come with one NVMe slot, because then I'm like sort of forced to like discard the thing that it came with in order to put in something new. I much preferred when laptops have two NVMe slots. Now, obviously, that compares with the Mac not giving you any expansion ability anyway. So, and I'm glad that they are going more the traditional laptop route here, because obviously, like, there are no smartphones out there with like this kind of expandability in terms of storage. But yeah, I don't have. They don't value that much, but obviously if you like really go cheap and buy a device with a 256 gigabyte base storage, or even 512, and then you later put in the fastest possible like 2 terabyte drive, and then you use that NVMe drive with like a storage adapter that makes it work like an external SSD, I can see the value there.
storage, and you can actually upgrade the storage inside.
Well, Kevin, I'm glad that you found this channel. When will I be streaming again? Well, my streaming rhythm is a little bit irregular, unfortunately, because obviously I do have life and work. But I'm probably streaming tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then the day after. And if you always want to be informed about like what I'm doing, you can follow me on Twitter, because that's where I'm most active, like throughout the day. Even like in like work breaks, I'll like open Twitter and see what's up. And glad to have you a subscriber. Welcome to the squad. Maybe you'll be one of the guys who will be bringing up to a magical 111K. You're asking personally, Mark, what are your thoughts on Samsung laptops using Snapdragon chips which are on phones over traditional Intel Apple-based laptops? The question with that is, you're probably referring like the Exynos version, right? They do plan like on making a larger Exynos chip. I would be interested in seeing that, but primarily on tablets. My question with Windows with Windows laptops, because laptops to me are just Windows. I don't like even the idea of like Chromebooks or whatever. And at that point, I'm like, do I want like, because at least Qualcomm has all the advantages of being like huge on mobile, and they have been doing like ARM chips for Windows for years, even if they have been crappy. If Samsung puts out an Exynos chip into like a laptop, my question is, what will their support look like, right? Will they have great drivers? Will like other OEMs integrate it in a good way? This is why I'm looking forward to like a custom Exynos chip that is maybe like 20% faster in CPU, maybe like 30-40% faster in graphics, so it wouldn't quite double their base Exynos, and then it would be optimized for tablets, which obviously Samsung makes nice big tablets. But for laptops, I'm not sure. It wouldn't really appeal to me, definitely.
Of this Samsung Galaxy Book 4, and you can actually upgrade it all the way up.
Well, yeah, it's a British accent. Yeah, now I can hear it. Don't even know like why I heard some Scottish in there. Maybe I'm mistaken.
4 terabytes if you want to do that. So you can go on Amazon, buy one, you can actually keep on from 512 gigabytes all the way up to. You have to configure that. Yeah. I think the main thing here, upgrade at least. This is a tricky one.
Yeah, this is the thing that is more interesting to us, which is like Snapdragon X Elite versus M3 in specs. Obviously, I've always said that, and obviously as the VivoBook is kind of the main device that is getting compared, I have no problem saying that in terms of like a hardware package, there is a lot where like there is better value to be had outside of Apple's ecosystem, especially when it comes to storage and RAM. But once you kind of account for that and deal with those expectations, you do get other benefits. Like Raoul Pote, welcome to the stream, my man, saying Apple hardware is more optimized, which, yeah, especially like also in the context of like your last question, Kevin, where it's like, how would I see like a Samsung chip, or be it a Snapdragon chip or even their own, right? On a Samsung laptop, like a smartphone chip working in a laptop is already questionable, because smartphone chips also have other downsides, right? Smartphone laptops don't come with the same bandwidth support. They don't have as many PCIe lanes for all those extra USB ports and Thunderbolt ports especially. They cannot handle even that much power. You would basically have to go overboard with like a good motherboard and stuff like that to make all that stuff still work well. And at that point, you would ask yourself, well, why don't I actually use like a tablet grade or like an actual laptop grade chip, right? And yeah, if you are in the ecosystem, it goes beyond just the optimized hardware. It's for me, for example, I use my iPhone 15 Pro Max as my camera on my MacBook Pro. I wouldn't even consider a Pro camera at this point for my streams, at least. I wouldn't. And even like there are small things, like I found out that like this Shure microphone that I have, it like works flawlessly with an iPhone. With like an Android devices, they don't seem to be able to give it enough power, or at least the drivers are not that well optimized. So there are other advantages to Apple that go beyond like, oh, it's Apple. We've had that for years with things like the Snapchat and Instagram apps, where like their image quality for some reason was crap if you're taking like an image in the app, which you would want to, because then you have like all those editing tools right away there and whatever. And it's gotten better over time, but it's still like pretty much an Apple market with those kinds of things.
Essentially what you're doing an apples to sort of a dragon comparison. That's the best way I can say this.
No, it's
not. You don't
not.
get the kind of same flavors here with sort of the chipset speeds and all of this. It's really, really tricky to do that, and I'm going to admit that right now. And that's why I picked, say, the M3 MacBook Pro, because I think this is the closest to this laptop. Whether you disagree with me or not, that's a different thing. Because at the end of the day, you could say, we'll use the MacBook Air, but obviously that doesn't have the mini LED display or the 120Hz ProMotion display in it, has less ports and things like this. It's far cheaper than this machine. It's very, very difficult. And the other thing you could say is, well, Matt, you should compare the M3 Pro because, you know, the Snapdragon Plus is more likely like the M3.
That is correct, but I also understand his argument that he will probably say that the M3 Pro is more expensive.
The Elite X. And again, it's really, really tricky here because, like I said, this, you know, the M3 Pro is way more expensive than the M3, and this would be far cheaper. And again, it just wouldn't be a fair comparison. To
Kevin, you're saying you have a 24-inch M3 iMac. It's a nice device. It's a very pretty device, and it's just great having the ecosystem, the beautiful blue color. Yeah, the blue is my favorite one on the new iMacs. I kind of wish they made it like just a tad more modern, like slim the bezels down a little bit. And I know the screen is great. Obviously, it's Retina quality, it's DCI-P3 and everything. But I think it's time for Apple to bring 120 hertz, like non-mini LED, non-OLED, to like other like the MacBook Air. I think should have like a 120 hertz screen that can go down to like 60 and 48 depending on the content you play or like the content you see. That will also help with stuff like battery life and whatever. And I think the same thing goes for like the iMac and obviously like even the iPad Air to a degree.
Me, this is the fairest I can do this in these specs. So yeah, what I'd say is please just respect that, because this is the best I can actually do here. Because like I said, I don't think we have a full orange to orange comparison.
you have sticky notes on the chin. Yeah, do you write all your passwords down on that sticky note, which was like in one Apple presentation that was like a meme of what you shouldn't be doing with your passwords.
Dragon comparison that we have here. But without further ado, let's talk about the specs that we have inside of this Samsung laptop. So the Samsung SoC inside of this is a Snapdragon X Elite.
This is just a raw comparison.
Let's have a look right here. Now, one thing what I have done on the Snapdragon...
I can already, by the way, like, it's not 16 gigabyte DDR5. What is... the teraflop number, yeah, it's correct, but it's not really relevant here. The NPU is not correct. It does not have 35 trillion operations per second. The what is... Okay, guys, I'm not liking this. Wait, that is incorrect. The M4 gives you 38 tops. The M3 APU gives you like, what was it, 18 tops? If I'm not M3 MacBook Pro. There's some weird mistakes here where I'm like, it's not a channel I really regularly cover, but it's not something that I would trust in the future this way. Can I just go to Apple without buying it? Okay, can I... Why German? I've set literally everything on this device to English over and over again. And it doesn't matter if it's Safari or Chrome or anything. So MacBook Pro, Safari, close this. So let's see. No. What? Hey, there should be like a pop-up menu that explains it to me. Go deeper on M3 chips. I'm going so deep on them. So faster ML. I'll just look up Apple M3 tops. 18 tops. I was correct. Okay, so this video, like, I don't like, for one, this is wrong. So it's 18 tops versus 35. 4.1 gigahertz is correct. For performance, for efficiency course is correct. The GPU is at least roughly correct. I don't fully remember the teraflop count. It's not 16 gigabytes of DDR5. It's 16 gigabytes of LPDDR5. It's not even LPDDR5X. So similar here. That's three. That's also, yeah, on the 80 version. But this one goes up to the 84 version, so you have to consider that. Then that would also change the clock speeds. But I do believe that those clock speeds are not correct anyway. It would still be 3.8 gigahertz. This is completely incorrect. What the F is this? 8 performance, 4 efficiency cores? Did he make those things up? It's 12 performance cores. The cores that are clocked lower are still the same Orion cores. They're just clocked lower for more efficiency. That doesn't turn them into efficiency cores. They don't have a special efficiency focused architecture.
Zeta 2, what we have here, single bench.
Okay, so I'll treat this video the way I did like one Dave 2D video, which I had stopped watching, because yes, with those kinds of mistakes, yeah, and I've already mentioned those benchmarks here, right? Which is 14,000 on the X Elite, 11,000 on the M3. I also said that the M4 will obviously bring you up here. I've also seen the M3 be up to 3,200 points, but it depends. I can fully understand that not every model will be the Silicon Lottery gods. Geekbench ML benchmark. What? That is, oh my god, where is he taking these numbers from?
14,151. The other thing what I've decided to do here is I've decided to do a Geekbench machine learning benchmark here. And this is testing out the actual main NPU or the neural engine on both.
Okay, yeah, that is garbage. That is not the result. My iPhone gives you 6,000 points on the NPU. Like, no, I apologize. My iPhone, after the latest iOS 18 update, gives you 7,600 points here. How is the M3? No, I understand the NPU is obviously like not as optimized for Int 8, but Geekbench ML doesn't give that much of a crap about Int 8 anyway. Yeah, this is garbage. This is complete garbage. This is just wrong on every level. Like, I have no idea. Like, this is a result that I have seen for the Snapdragon X Elite, but it's completely wrong for the MacBook Pro. Guys, am I going insane? You do, like, I think most of you will have some basic knowledge of like how benchmarks behave. This is not normal. Like Geekbench ML, iPhone 15 Pro Max, iOS 18. Shout out to my Twitter friend, Raphael, who just gave us those numbers. And yes, I did check them out on my own 15 Pro Max, where yes, this is the result. And yes, those are the results on the neural engine. So those are not like full GPU or whatever results. And the GPU is generally a little slower on the iPhone, at least, where the GPU is obviously relatively small and compared to an M series chip. I believe my iPhone gives it like 5,500 points for the GPU. But yeah, this is where you get with the 15 Pro Max if you test the NPU, the Apple Neural Engine. So I have no idea what those results are, and I have no idea why he wouldn't know that it's wrong. Has he never tested that stuff before? I saw some people like commenting really nicely about this video. This is why I thought I would give it a chance, because obviously I have reacted in the past to people like MKBHD, Dave 2D, but this is just garbage results. Cinebench, single core, yeah. Wait, what? Cinebench. Which Cinebench is he using here?
One Cinebench official ARM version. I'll bench again, I believe at the moment, but I could be wrong there. But yeah, just be aware of that. Moving along then is Cinebench again. Same thing again. Prism scores definitely on this. And I don't think actually there's a Cinebench official ARM version either. The last time I...
Cinebench Windows on ARM. Yes, Cinebench 2024 supports Apple ARM-powered silicon computing system as well as Windows ARM and Snapdragon. He didn't do any research here. I apologize, but this is garbage. He just said, I'm not sure if there is a Cinebench version out there that supports Windows on ARM. That's just patently untrue. Even I knew that.
check.
So he tried to blame Prism for like for it like not winning the Geekbench ML, which he like ran probably in some very wrong way. I'm not giving you guys any more bad data. So I just wanted to say I do have more stuff to react to, right? But it is now a 2-hour stream and I do want to wrap it up. So I apologize for this ending this way, but maybe it's better this way because like this, I'm not trying to be like a paradigm of virtue here or saying that I'm the best tech streamer that you will ever have, even though obviously tech is a little bit different, right? But like Dave 2D, we've already had some issues with Dave 2D, but those don't always come up. Dave 2D is usually pretty reliable. Now, he had some numbers when it comes to battery life and things like that. He also has like Premiere Pro render time. So there are some interesting benchmarks here. Unfortunately, like the 8745HS still wins. It's just that the old SQ3 from Qualcomm looked so bad. But
had to be interaction. Sometimes app run on this.
Kevin, which one which one is good to watch for like short? So those videos are completely out. The Dave 2D video. You know what? I'm not. I'm not gonna watch Dave 2D, but I will go through the most important things that he had said. Right? I think that's the fairest thing for like my time and yours. So he starts out as everyone else with Geekbench and Cinebench. It's very familiar numbers. He does smartly, like at least for Cinebench, only compared to like the x86 chips because. And that's kind of what matters. He shows that those chips are very, very close to each other here, which is both a good thing because obviously it is, well, it's not really Qualcomm's first chip, but in the Windows ARM space, but it is at least something, right? It's at least something new. And then like a native ARM app like 7-Zip, he showed that it like performs best on the VivoBook, which is good because also consider that the VivoBook does have that gimped version of it, right? That 78 version. At least I don't know if there is a faster SKU on the VivoBook and which one he had, but if it is correct, that's a good result in my opinion.
As being fast compared to what we've seen. There aren't a lot of native.
Okay, so he does also have Wildlife Extreme test and Geekbench. You can see that Geekbench does not fully line up with the results you get in like actual like gaming graphics tasks. It is more of a compute thing, and then it depends a little if you do it like in OpenCL or in Vulkan. But yeah, at least in Wildlife Extreme, this is, by the way, what I'm trying to get at, is that Wildlife Extreme performs really, really good on Adreno GPUs, but both these chips will win against the Snapdragon X Elite in regular graphics, even very handily. So the fact that it wins in Wildlife Extreme makes the point that I was trying to make before that, which is that it disproportionately performs well on this test, more so than real-world results, which is obviously not really the point of a benchmark. But then this is also why I said Wildlife Extreme is not Steel Nomad. So I don't want to just shit on 3D Mark. They do have a newer test out there, and I wish more people would be using it.
Depends on the benchmark you throw at it, but 6 app currently. They are working on an ARM version, but even in emulation mode...
It would be cool to compare tests from the battery rather than the power cable. Yes, Well, we do have like power consumption metrics, but for some reason people have problems like ascertaining the exact power usage from the SoC. Like, so they do resort to like testing power from the wall. If you have like devices that are otherwise created equally, that's one thing. But I do understand that we are lacking proper data. This is why I'm saying this was part 1 or part 2, depending on if you count my previous 5-minute coverage in like one of my previous streams. But yeah, it's definitely hard to get like really good, like I would say like ground truth data, right? Like data that is absolutely correct, data that can be used to even like build new benchmarks on top of it, because we know it's so correct that if it can, like its results are replicated in something else, then that something else is also working correctly.
Blew me away. It is completely usable on the VivoBook S15.
It's completely usable. Yeah, that has become a tiny bit of a meme on Twitter. Where it's like, high praise, Dave. Like, it's completely usable.
So I remember right when that happened, SQ3 chip performed.
So yeah, Premiere Pro, we have already covered it.
Natively?
Does not yet have a fully native ARM version, so let's see. But also Adobe is not the greatest when it comes to optimizing. People misunderstand. They think that because something is built for ARM, that means that it's automatically super optimized for every ARM chip. That is not the case. It's just like any x86 and like DirectX 12 game can like run on basically any modern NVIDIA or AMD GPU, but you can still do a lot of as a developer to favor one architecture over the other. But I was maybe wrong. As I've not had a powerful laptop. The performance of the X8 becomes lower than the. Which processor do you mean? Because Mokotek, if you're saying that x86 is just by definition less efficient than ARM, that is not correct. Like ARM uses smaller instructions. That's what it means, right? To be like a RISC-based architecture, a reduced instruction set architecture. And that can help with efficiency, but you still need to consider what node it's built on, how much cache it has, how much bandwidth it manages, what are the specific IP blocks for media encoding and stuff like that, even just how close all components are, like the storage, the RAM, things like that. No, don't say that x86 is like by default less efficient or something like that. Yeah, the question is that performance is lower on battery than it is on while plugged in. That, as you see, it might apply to x86 more because AMD and Intel have just for years optimized their chips for higher power usage. But we did have like super efficient chips from both of them. Like Intel has had Tiger Lake, which was like specifically optimized to be like in super small devices. And even this, just because it's ARM, doesn't mean it gives you 100% of its performance. Basically, the difference between plugged in or not, you have to build your device with that in mind. And Apple does that and nobody else does it. The second Qualcomm builds like an SoC that is twice as large, maybe with like maybe with 12 performance, but 4 efficiency cores are there, so there are even more threads on it. Maybe it has double the graphics cores, right? So it's not just more powerful because it's a new architecture or whatever, but it actually has like more execution units. That device will also not reach 100% of its power just because it's ARM. ARM is not magic. People should stop basically awarding ARM for all the benefits of Apple Silicon, because that's not true. Apple Silicon chips are great because Apple at one point became really great at chip design. And Intel's x86 chips back in like the and like the 22 nanometer era were better than everything else, not because x86 has large instructions and therefore it's the most performant ones. No, it's because Intel's architecture, like their specific implementation, was great. It's because their node at that time was better than anyone else's. So yeah, I just want to we should talk more about the actual accomplishments of individual companies rather than turn this into like a discussion about x86 versus ARM. Kevin, you gotta go to work. Have a nice work day, man. Glad that you enjoyed the stream. See you next time. And as always, I do recommend you guys follow me on Twitter to know when I'm going live next, and so you can see my follow-up coverage.
But the fact that you don't have to depend on a developer to make stutter, and for I think that a bunch of games.
The frame rate. Then we do have game benchmarks that are I believe those are the results that Qualcomm itself provides. At least I assume they are. But because I believe that if Dave had actually tested Overwatch himself, he would have found that Overwatch has stutters and that the game doesn't actually run at 1080p in the sense that we know 1080p, which is 1920 by 1080, but it has a weird resolution maximum of 1280 by 1080. So yeah, this is, by the way, Mo Kotek, where you are absolutely correct in your previous statements about translation layers and just in general, is it ARM optimized? Is it x86 optimized? Is it even optimized for Adreno GPU versus NVIDIA GPUs, AMD GPUs? That for now is definitely not the case. So while we might have some artificial benchmarks that could give you 95% of its theoretical maximum graphics performance, when it comes to more complex games and where you also tax the CPU more, especially in higher frame rate games, now we really are in almost at a loss for words with just how little data we can, how much little good data we can collect, unfortunately.
About respectable thermals. The VivoBook S15 competitive shooters, but if you do need to step.
So yeah, the fan noise was not very encouraging to me, but because obviously I know that the MacBook Air could do all those things to a degree fanless at a similar performance level, but it is competitive with what else is out there.
Different sized battery, it's difficult to compare it directly to that, but just in general, it's very common for batteries. This new VivoBook has a different sized battery, way better than what we've seen in the past. Them to sleep 2% price, and it also has
where are his graphics?
So I do like the way that the keyboard color of the key colors on an OLED way better than what we've seen to the battery life that Apple has going on for the MacBooks for Ultra stuff.
There. So this is the last thing I kind of want to cover because I believe Dave has some decent data here. He does basically show that it's only second to the MacBook when it comes to battery life. Now, granted, it does have a relatively large battery capacity here. Now, the Intel chip sucks, in my opinion, because this is a very, very large battery for a pretty small chip. But as far as I know, there's also the issue that it seems like those devices, at least I know the Razer Blade and Zephyrus, they also all have integrated not integrated but they dedicated GPUs, and while those dedicated GPUs can basically turn themselves off for stuff like Netflix playback, that depends. Sometimes you have to do that manually, right? Sometimes the firmware doesn't quite do what you want. And while it's a relevant test to make, I do believe that those are not actually relevant devices to compare with. And I think he basically just compared them because those were the devices he had on hand, and those are the devices that he likes and he has experience with. So I just wanted to say, the early data that we're getting right now, and the reason why I didn't cover it yesterday, is there's a lot of weird stuff. And tomorrow we will go through another video and at that point, I do hope we'll also go through like actual like written proper benchmark stuff. But like the notebook check reviews is actually pretty good. It brings up a lot of valid points, and it makes very relevant comparisons to x86. But I do want to combine this with an upcoming article where they actually like test, where they actually provide us all benchmarks and stuff like that in like graph form and things like that. I think that will be the best user experience for all of us. There's also like a video from Tag Tablets, but it is a little long, and it's a good video, but it doesn't say that much more than everyone else's. So yeah, I do definitely have a lot more to react to and analyze, but I do want to like, with every 24 hours, we'll keep on getting better data, and I am very much interested in giving you guys the best data possible. So for now, this is basically it. Mokotic saying, you're still wondering if there's a possibility to connect a discrete video card via USB 4. Yes, there is. USB 4 does work with external GPUs. I'm not sure if what the speeds are of USB 4 on those devices, if they're like full speed 40 gigabit per second, but in theory USB 4 by itself allows you to connect it. I don't know how well it works with the X Elite, but I'm sure somebody will test it. And yeah, there's of course the question about drivers. But then again, you can also, in theory, like force to run like drivers through like an emulation layer, because technically you need the drivers for like the GPU, right? Not the CPU itself. But I definitely wouldn't spend money on such a setups. But it will be in the future the ability to connect and install drivers. Now, whether it is displayed in the device manager or not. Yeah, and it goes back also to the point that I made about like dedicated GPUs inside like those other laptops that they've 2D tested, because again, it's also a driver thing. Like, can you activate them manually? Can you turn them off manually? So for like maximum efficiency and stuff like that. So let's see basically how drivers develop on the X Elite, how support from external developers, how Microsoft itself keeps giving support to Windows on ARM. But this is basically my initial like broad like coverage of the Snapdragon X Elite and its first few laptops. I thank you everyone who tuned in. I think my first like summary of this is mostly what I expected, because I didn't expect too much. Some disappointment, but also like some carefulness here, because I do know that obviously a lot of things can change from like early firmware and of course all those non-optimized apps. And beyond that, I'm of course interested in seeing other devices that come out. I am a little bit disappointed to see just the discrepancy between all those laptops, where like those chips don't scale quite how I would have liked them to. But then obviously the Surface is then also more expensive to those other devices. So even has like a worse chip, you kind of do want it to almost outperform expectations. So it's a little bit of a mess, which is disappointing given that it's been now like 8 to 9 months in the works, right? I hoped that this launch would be very smooth, because they just took so much time. I'm a little disappointed there aren't more like heavily optimized apps, but I will keep on covering more and more, right? And as time progresses, I hope that almost by definition there will be more like ground truth data, as I called it before. So as always, while I'm like wrapping up here, and if you are still watching, that's a massive thank you from me. Thank you for making this chat super duper lively. Thank you for growing this community. If you haven't subscribed yet and you're enjoying this, please subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, both when the video is now live, but also once it's been uploaded, because we do have a massive discrepancy on this channel between likes and comments. I do want to correct correct that. Share that out to that video to anyone who you think might enjoy it. And if you catch me live, consider leaving a super chat or a super sticker. All financial support is very much appreciated. It is reinvested right back into the channel. Or subscribe to my Patreon. We do have a free tier there as well, but consider subscribing to one of the paid ones to support this channel directly in the long term. And beyond that, I'm just looking forward to covering more Apple stuff, more Snapdragon X Elite stuff. I hope that we'll also get a lot more information about Microsoft's Copilot things, features, whatever. So that might be actually part of future X Elite coverage, because for now, that is the only chip that natively supports those X Elite features. And as always, I'll just see you next time. Please let me know what else you would like to see me cover, or if you have some disagreements or corrections for me. And I'll catch you next time. This is Mark Tech, tuning out once I find my correct spot in the camera. Thank you all so much.